Is this frogwood? Because smells like frogs. Yeah. Oh. Fire song. Enough tomfoolery, shenanigans. It's time for that little show that some of you know all too well. You got to put the bowl on the head because it's time for room design. Oh, cop a squat, stone cold chill with your homie old hankering, and let's bust this sucker out. Yeah! Greetings, programs. It's Hanker and Furnail here. Welcome back to Drunkens and Dragons. Another kick-ass episode. How to play D&D like a big old grown-ass woman or man, either one or both. This is Room Design, and we have got a new creative sequence on my hands here, a new process. Now, you guys know me. I'm always putting way too much thought into creative process itself. Other creative types look for deeper, more meaningful, more quality, and more reliable creative output, right? It's always fascinating to me, especially just like living this DM's journal life, which I know you guys are doing the same thing, and it's never easy, right? It's always a struggle, and that struggle to me is very interesting. So, as part of that journey, for this room design, and I mentioned this in the previous video, I was just stumped forever. The new, well, not the new way, but in this particular case, I began the room design process not with the room itself, but with a story. And as a few comments have already popped up from Chris Hatley and others, this is a great technique. I don't know why the hell I wasn't doing this sooner. It's awesome. To write the story in many ways is simpler and more intuitive than like inventing game mechanics, right? Which I think is part of the popularity of the room design series, right? It's like mechanics are not easy to come up with, generally speaking, but if you just ask yourself, hey, what's next in the story? What could be next? You know, now for me, I do get a little bit of a free pass because since this isn't happening with players right now, I get to kind of guide it a little bit, right? Normally you'd want the story to be open enough where the players have a meaningful role in sort of how things play out. But this time around, instead of just designing it right here into my journal with the mechanics as a map, which is how I almost always begin, as I draw a map and then I intuit what that map means and then start working on it. This time I wrote the story, the talking head, right? And I knew what was going to happen in the story. I knew they were going to go into the swamp and that Garrett would be there and he's got this head on a stick and then there's some surprises and I knew about the weakness mechanic and the timer and stuff like that. So let's get into it now. All those little details of those easy intuitive ideas, they just become mechanics. So that's what happened to me right here in the talking head. So this is a continuation of the Rangers of Numidia from the campaign encounters stuff. So that started, remember, with Westburg getting flooded. They went up, Garrett Frack is summoning these demons and they kicked his ass and then they jumped out of this thing and then they got swept into the flood there, remember that? And they went down into the Cavern of the Lizard Men. They ran around in there, they found this statue that looked just like Helm, but it was like 1,000 years old and they're like, whoa, that's weird. And then they met Stills with his family. Remember, they went back into the mansion, and the family was all undead and crazy because Garrett Frack's trying to sort of make the whole world undead. So they did all that stuff. Then they went up north to find this guy, Grey Elk, to help them to go fight Garrett Frack because they didn't want to get the butts kicked again. They go up, and then there's all these wolves, and the wolves also have this sort of sickness on them. Like, Garrett Frack's sort of great spell is far more powerful than they thought. They fight all the wolves. They make a pact. They come back down, and they go to Frogwood, because that's where they know that Garrett Frack is going to do this ritual, right? As part of making this mega spell that's going to make the world undead. Now, what the details are of that exact spell and exactly how it works, I don't know. We'll figure that out as we go, right? But it's dangerous and it's bad, and that's what matters. So I got my stick. That means it's time for room design. Okay, so down at this end of the table here, you have the entrance. And you guys know, I know that this is totally an open swamp and everything, but I almost always will just have a place where I put the players and say this is kind of how you began. Now in the story, they also kind of hang out like up here on a rock, on a rocky outcrop, and they kind of survey the scene. And I think that would be a cool part of the room too, is kind of start your night with them on this rock, and they can survey it, and maybe they can come up with a battle plan, or maybe they can send in a scout or something interesting. But I think that outcrop is a nice to get things started. And, you know, you can make it really easy just out of like a big chunky, you know, take your chunky piece of stone foam like from Shattered Stairs or something and just kind of stick it up there. That's where we're going to start. You're looking down, whoop, and then here's where you kind of enter this area. Okay, so what is this area? You enter this clearing in the Frogwood. So you're in this sort of misty swamp. Now in the story, they wait till first light to go in. And so it's like dawn, and there's this sort of thin mist that's hanging over here, and you have these dense stands of bushy trees. And then in this clearing, there's this sort of what I've been calling a longhouse. So it's kind of like almost like a brew hall, like an old Viking brew hall, but it's made with sort of mud thatch and timbers, and it's poorly made. So it's very sort of has this primitive, kind of almost voodoo-ish kind of feel to it. So when you're doing your description, you know, the description is about this kind of lumpy sensation, and like where normal windows would normally be, there are these kind of round openings with sort of flickering light glowing from within. Almost like a big rectangular Yoda hut. There's this big rectangular Yoda hut. Front door is just sort of an opening. It's not a door, it's a doorway. And you can hear this kind of boom, you know, magic murmuring inside. As they're surveying this scene, you have a couple of little outcrops of stone here, because, you know, those are always good to have in a room to kind of provide a place to hide, or maybe they can be tipped over. It's like just something I put in all my spaces. And if they wait a second, they will see these guys here. So this is my patrol. I know that the word patrol is a little corny. It's a little bit, you know, MMORPG, right? But I've never really done one. I realized it. That's crazy. So the timer is a cyclic timer in this room. So that's kind of interesting to me. So basically it takes them 2 turns or 2 rounds for the patrol to just do this. And this is all they do. They just orbit the longhouse. So when the players arrive, they have kind of a free round. Do things, do things, do things. Then on that second round, that sort of 2 goes to 0, and then here these guys come, they walk across, and if they don't do anything, if they just like hold, the guys just keep going. They disappear, there's a free round, and then on the following one, there they are again. So it's like every other round, these guys are out front. So they could use that to their advantage. And that's kind of what I was trying to portray in the story too, is the group kind of sets up behind this log, and they're kind of like, you know, Grey Elk draws this huge arrow called a bear arrow, and he's like going to try to shoot 3 guys in one shot. Okay, so that's your fundamental timer. And that's for the beginning. There's kind of a couple phases to this room. So the beginning timer is this sort of, so if they try to sneak in, you know, unassailed by these guards, they have sort of a limited amount of time. Or maybe they get tangled up with the guards. You could even separate the bigger sort of Sahagwin guy, the big abomination guy, and put him on an alternating timer. So that you have the little group that's kind of easy to fight, then he arrives. Or they wait for the little group to go by, then he's by himself. And then if they delay, the other guys catch up and it combines. So you can see where it's all going, right? It's like 2 little clocks spinning, or you can just make it one group that moves around. Anyways, that's part 1. So they're both your timer and your threat built into one. So as far as the threat, these are just guards, right? And they're just guarding this place so that this wizard can do dark stuff inside the house and not be molested. Okay, so there's your timer and your threat. So what's your treat? Your treat for the first phase is the bear arrows. So Grey Elk carries, and you could roll for it, or you can just say there's 3, but he has these huge arrows that they use up in the north, up in Numidia. And these things are like 4.5 feet long with this big like oak shaft on them and all this crazy barbed like hunting steel arrowhead. And it like maybe even takes 2 people to pull one of these suckers back. This idea came from another thing that we had, a theme we had in the ICRPG universe, which was called a black arrow. And it's this really difficult to pull, super powerful bow, and it actually takes a round just to pull it. Anyway, 3 of these big badass arrows. So the way that I would write the rule on the arrows is that until an arrow hits a solid object, like a wall or a rock, it will pierce any number of targets and do the same damage to all those pierced. So like if you can get a line shot, that's the idea with the bear arrows, is to line up a, you know, here's guy, and all 3 of them can be shot in a shot. And that's knowledge that you give your group, that like Grey Elk tells them, you know, he tells Helm, this is how the arrows work. So maybe you just let the NPC do the shooting on that, but that's not as cool. You know the PCs want to shoot these bear arrows. So there you go. There's your treat. Okay, so that's phase 1. So phase 1, they basically fight these damn things. All right, and make these guys kind of easy. These are like, maybe this guy has like 30 HP and these guys have 12, okay? So cha-cha-cha, big fight, ooh, clank, clank, clank. So let me hear let me get, so they start moving up, right? Everybody's fighting, clank, 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 ooh, we killed this thing. So when you get kills happening up here, and you're knocking your guys down like I do, keep them on the board, because now we're about to go to phase 2. Okay, so they beat all these guys, and Zymer's like, taking a look, and then in the story there's this voice. So whenever they defeat someone, or when they defeat the group of guards, there's this laughter from in the house, and then this voice that just comes out of all directions. And it's like, there's no need to do any killing. You guys can come on and enter. We can be friends in the new undead world. So this is kind of, in a way, it's like Zymer's responsibility. It's a moment for him, because remember in the story he accidentally helped Garrett Frack figure out this grand spell. Okay, so the group comes in because they know, I mean, they're here for a fight, right? They're not here to, they're here to kill this guy. Remember, he killed all of Still's family. Like, this guy's a jerk. Okay, so you come into the room, and then the room, the longhouse, I mean, they come into the longhouse, and the longhouse is a bit of a different encounter. As they engage, and they're going to, exchange some words here with Garrett Frack. Garrett Frack is a high-level caster, and he has this wooden pike next to him with a head. And the head on the end of the pike has its hair down over its face. Okay, then you have a torch at the front, and you have a brazier at the rear. So that's your treat. It's a very, very low-level treat. It's like fire. Give me some workable fire that I could do something with. And in a hut like this, this is timber and stuff. It's very flammable. Players are always brilliant with fire. So just sometimes giving them just that. And they still have the arrows if they conserved them from before. They come in, as they're talking and sharing words with Garrett, they notice that, like, these guys are reanimating. They stand back up and fill them all the way back up with hit points. Maybe do it in 2 steps. So if this guy has 30 hit points, when he kind of comes back up, he has 15. Next round, he's back to 30. Okay, but these guys all start reanimating. And they're like, oh, God. Oh, no. This is not good. So what is the fight? At some point, either before or during the fight, Garrett reveals this head. He pulls the hair aside, and it's him. It's his head on this pike. And this is what he's getting ready to tell the heroes, but don't do it in this adventure. We're going to save this weird sort of bafflement. We're going to save the reveal on what's going on there until the next adventure. So it's just like, what the? That's his head? But his head's on his body. Like, what is happening? You notice that the head on the pike is like mumbling and saying magical words. Here's your basic gist of this mechanic here. As long as that head is alive and mumbling, everything that's a bad guy will resurrect, will reanimate when killed. And it'll happen quickly too, like this is going to be a problem. So that's really the fundamental angle here. Even if the characters or the players figure that out right away, they still have to execute the combat and get it done. So it doesn't have to be a big secret that that's the mechanic. But if it takes them 2 or 3 rounds to figure that mechanic out, that's going to be a dangerous 2 or 3 rounds. So that's part 1. Then for your threat, you've got summoning lots of Sahagwins, right? So I just, for the sake of doing it, I have these skeletons here. Just to give you this feeling of this insane crowd. So what you are creating here is this really crowded, tight little battle like this. And then maybe, this kind of space is something that Stills, I don't know where Stills went, I can't see. Where the hell is he? Oh, here he is. So maybe he can use this by sort of hopping around in here. Maybe he finds some rafters and he's running across the rafters, like doing some crazy stuff. Maybe the fire starts breaking out, whatever. All kinds of cool things can happen. But these guys cannot be killed as long as the head is still mumbling. So I could see a scenario where they actually don't destroy the head. They like stuff its mouth full of mud or something to shut it up. So Garrett is a high-level caster. They're fighting a caster. You guys all know how to run a good caster battle. Fun stuff. And then they realize, oh my God, the head is the real problem. Pew! They blast the head. Okay, we got rid of the head. I actually made a little head mini here. I think I have a photo of it. Then, okay, nobody's reanimating anymore. And then in fact, they all start disappearing. So not only do they fix the animation, the reanimation problem, but once that head is shut up, the spell that's conjuring all these things, I'm talking like there are 6 of these appear per round. Like they're just going. You basically want to present your players with unwinnable odds that are either going to cause them to flee or figure it out, but you're going to need to really bring the pain down, and you're going to have to do it with authority to make this feel like it needs to feel. Otherwise, it's just going to be like, hey, like 4 little imps appeared and then we killed them. It just doesn't have that gravity. You need them to have to do the head puzzle. So they destroy the head or muffle it, whatever. All the Sahagwin not only stop reanimating, but then they all start disappearing into puffs of brimstone, right? In the process, maybe they subdue Garrett Frack and he survives. Maybe they take him as a prisoner. Maybe they blow the head to bits and kill Garrett Frack. Either way, at the end of the encounter, when everything is gone and it's all kind of over, that same laughter echoes from all directions. Okay, so here's Garrett is gone. The head is gone. It's just this empty thing. They're in here. These guys are down and don't get back up anymore. In the story, Grey Elk actually gets killed by Garrett Frack in the melee. So here's our guys, and Foxy saves the day in the story. And here they okay. And it's just empty in there. And they're, oh my gosh, we got to get out of here. So in the story, they actually burn the longhouse to the ground, and then they bury Grey Elk. And pretty heavy business. And then they decide they're going to go back to Westburg to try to help rebuild. So now that they've killed Garrett Frack in their minds, even though they don't feel very satisfied about the whole thing, they're going to go back home and they're going to see if they can salvage some of the town and try to, make good. And there you go. There's your whole thing. So you have phase 1. You've got the patrol timing, right? Then you've got the bear arrows, and you got the monsters to fight. Then phase 2, you have your mumbly head, you've got your caster, and then you've got totally overwhelming additional mob ads, I guess you call it. Today's like MMORPG term day. Anyway, you get a crowd of ads in here that is totally overwhelming, and they have to use the head puzzle to beat it. So it's not the most complex mechanic ever, but the satisfaction of figuring out that little head puzzle can be really fun. And after you get through all this combat, there you have maybe 2/3 of a night, depending on if they play the outcrop, or if you maybe do a little smaller encounter in the swamp, or maybe things go a little differently than what I'm portraying here. But it gives you your, what do you need to craft, what's your layout, what's your monsters, how's it all going to go down, and it gives you a room. A designed room. A talking head. I'm going to take this orange stick here, which I use for pointing at things. I also just wind up being like pointing with just probably a lot more normal people point like by doing that. Anyways, thanks for tuning in, guys. If you haven't already, go check out the story version of this encounter, which is over on Patreon, and it's free. And that, to me, that crossover is what's interesting and kind of where I would like to start trying some new things. So we're going to keep Rangers of Numidia going. I'm going to write another chapter of their story, and then we'll do another encounter or set of encounters that will match up. Okay, so we're going to get this campaign caught up to the Black Ocean campaign, to the Moloch campaign. We're gonna pick this baby back up, and we're going to go. Yeah, I think I covered everything. Oh, you know what else I wrote in my book was the quoth the head. So I've got my little picture of my little head there. And then I have like 4 quotes that the head will say. And they are, we are not here. We are not anywhere. And so this is a very obtuse and cryptic hint at what is really to come in the campaign that explains how his head was next to him. And that's going to be a big fun reveal in the next chapter. I also have, fight if you must, but this time is already doomed. Like, what? This time? What do you mean? And then finally, Helm the Spearman, so you've returned. And Helm's like, what? Returned from what? What are you talking about? But that's exactly, those are the hints. And that's why they're worth writing down. A lot of times I won't write down, role-playing, like, bad guy voices. Like, it's hard enough to be at the table and do a bad guy voice, right? I mean, you guys totally can relate to me on that one. But if I want to make sure I drop a specific clue, then I'll write that little clue down. I'll write that clue down. That's it. And then I also drew a weird looking monster. The encounter wasn't hard enough, so I put an Agnar in here. See you next time, guys. Strength, honor, beer, you, me, D&D. We gonna play some.